My screen with you. Okay. Start. Is it okay for everyone?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much to the organizing committee of the conference for managing to reunite us at least twice because it's such a challenge. I hope everyone can hear me clearly.
Would you mind pressing continue on the recording permission, please, because it's blocking the screen.
Okay. Just a minute. Where can I do that? I can't see that.
It's okay. Go ahead, please.
It's okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I just hope everything is fine because there is a heavy rain shower at the moment. So I hope everyone can hear me quite clearly. I also say hello to my friends and colleagues in the assistance. I'm very happy to be with you this morning and to contribute in a way to the discussion. My paper will focus on the excavations conducted on the shores of the Salt Lake of Larnaca from 1864 to 1868. So we are a bit earlier than the focus of the conference, at the place known as the Saline of Larnaca, known for its salt production until recently. I have been commenting on this research and the archaeological material collected there in different occasions, as it was the main topic of my PhD research. But what I am intending to do today is to concentrate on one specific aspect: the people involved in the saline digging operations, including members of the British Museum, and the condition of those excavations, in order to offer a first bit of answer to the question: is a contextual study of the archaeological material excavated in the 1860s in Cyprus still possible? Between 1864 and 1868, different teams of diplomats from the consular services in Cyprus took part on excavations conducted near the eastern shores of the Salt Lake in Larnaca. They found there a significant amount of finely produced terracotta figurines dated from the archaic and classical periods, found together with a few inscriptions, one in Phoenician and at least 4 in Greek. Charles de Maricourt, brother of the French consul in Larnaca, was the first in 1864 to accidentally identify the site, from which he formed one of the first private collection of Cypriot antiquities. For information about this private initiative, we rely most exclusively on the private correspondence of different members of the de Maricourt family. I am indebted here to Mrs. Lucy Bonato, historian and specialist of the consular history of Cyprus, who read and published some of the family's private archives and history. At first, the collection of terracottas was mostly for the family of the French consul a leisure activity that used to break the monotony of the long Sundays afternoons in Larnaca. A letter wrote by Charles de Maricourt's nephew suggests that the family not only picked up material in the saline, but also engaged in digging operations a bit later on. Those operations were never to be mentioned in the French diplomatic correspondence. The news of the discovery of several hundreds of finely produced figurines in Larnaca is, however, released by their colleagues stationed there: Gustave Kirilli, who was the son of the local drugman, Robert Lenk, the British vice consul, and Melchior de Voguet, informed by his friend Demetrios Pierides from the well-established Pierides family in Larnaca. Just a year later, in August 1865, the French consul, Louis de Maricourt, died in Larnaca during the cholera pandemic. He is then replaced in 1866 by Tiburce Colonna-Ceccaldi, who will play a significant role together with his brother George. In October 1868, while traveling to France, Tiburce Colonna-Ceccaldi officially reported the discovery of the figurines and the so-called sanctuary on the shores of Larnaca's Salt Lake in l'Académie des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres in Paris. He is also describing in this communication for the first time the material, the iconography of the assemblage, and most importantly, the surroundings and the setting where the material is currently found. In 1869, he is writing to the director of the Revue Archéologique with further insights. 1 year later, in 1870, his brother George published in the same review the first map situating the archaeological finds in the Saline. In parallel of these French first initiatives, starting in July 1865, the British Vice Consul in Larnaca, Dominique Ellis-Colnaghi, is joining the French team in the Salt Lake. The dig resulted in a large collection of still several hundreds of terracottas that were split in 2 batches. Some went to the Maricos family and are still today, except from a few objects that were offered to the Louvre. But luckily for posterity, Colnaghi's collection was entirely donated to the British Museum in 1866. The collection is described and drawn in some sketches in Colnaghi's correspondence with Charles Newton, keeper of the Greek and Roman antiquities in the British Museum. The descriptions given by Colnaghi to his superior are unfortunately very scarce, and there is no map of any kind in the documentation. Nevertheless, this collection represents today 230 figurines at least, and is the only batch from the Saline's cultic plates that is still entirely preserved. This is finally the American consul Luigi Palma di Cesnola, who dug most part of the remaining site after Dominique Colnaghi's finishing. That is to say, between 1866 and 1868, occasioning a massive destruction of the area. Reconstructing Cesnola's operations is not only impossible, but also appears to be worthless due to the misleading pieces of information that Luigi Cesnola was intended to spread on its own achievements. Cesnola invented there a temple, for example, which is nowhere to be found, of course. The very intensive work of Cesnola in the area, he excavated there between the summer of 1866 and the winter of 1868, resulted in a huge collection, mainly of terracottas, but also Greek inscriptions. And we do know also, thanks to Colonna-Ceccaldi, the French consul, that he explored several tombs in the area, probably the Roman necropolis of Kition. This is very likely that Cesnola, unlike others, excavated the top of the Salt Lake northeastern hill, as the French and the British diplomats seems to have been working closer to the water. You can see here on the map, I tried to reconstruct those operations. In area B, the zone where Cesnola probably excavated, and in area A, so closer to the lake, the zone excavated by the French and the British, I think, and below what the place looks like today. To localize Cesnola's work in the Saline, we can only rely on the map drawn by Auguste Dozon, French consul in Larnaca, published 15 years later in the first volume of the Corpus Inscriptionem Semiticarum, who is the only map mentioning Cesnola's trenches in the Salt Lake of Larnaca. Later, that is to say between 1870 and 1879, Others, scholars, travelers, or diplomats, occasionally reported activities in the Salt Lake area. Max Onefalsch-Richter, corresponding with Charles Newton, for example, considered excavating there, but never did it actually. He said the place was fully ransacked by Chesnola's workmen. Onefalsch-Richter, together with Robert Hamilton Lang, though testified the various ongoing looting operations that continued to take place in the salines from Chesnola's operations onwards. As a result, today, a lot of museums preserve objects said to be from the saline of Larnaca. Some were obviously part of the terracotta deposits, originally dug by the diplomatic teams, for example, the British Museum collection and also the de Marico's collection in the Louvre. But others came from occasional looting operations as well, including Chesnola's trenches. The analysis of the Salt Lake archives from various forms, mainly letters, travel accounts, and maps, resulted in a quite complex and intricate stratigraphy of data. Luckily, some of it could still be confronted to modern observations on the topography of the site and permitted to locate most of the digging operations. What remains open is the status of the archaeological material from the area. What about it? How to consider it? Is a contextual study still possible? I believe the answer is yes, and it must be so, but it's not that easy. And if you intend to, you have to be extra careful to reveal the circumstances specific to each protagonist. To be more specific, one possibility is to track down every object from the excavators to museums, and sometimes, unfortunately, also through auction sales catalogs. But this will offer no help without investigating the situation in Cyprus and the diplomatic world who supervised unlicensed diggings and explore the how and why they exported artifacts to recently created institutions. The case of the Saline reveals quite clearly the trade of antiquities as a sort of diplomatic maneuvering. The inclusion of the terracottas from Larnaca's Salt Lake in the first catalogue raisonné of figurines in the early 20th century were precisely used to underline the cultural misappropriation of those antiquities, which were often quoted to allude to the Greekness of Cyprus from the classical period onwards. In other words, the reconstruction of this archaeological corpus is valid if we are able to assure its integrity. To do so means a critical reflection on the circumstances of the discoveries and sometimes as well renunciation. In the case of the Saline, this meant for me to put aside all the objects said to be from the Salt Lake according to Luigi Cesnola, in order to maintain the credibility of the reconstructed assemblage. I thank you very much for your attention.